When do you think is the right time to bring the fractional product managers?
One of the things we're seeing when people bring us in is they're at the end of their wits. It's not like when the first PM quits from the team, is when the second one quits within 2 weeks or gets sick or starts underperforming. They're like, okay, I cannot do this anymore.
For the product managers who are listening, do you think moving toward fractional product management is a good idea?
For people to just be independent on their own, you can try fractional. It's also a good way to date certain companies without making a full-time commitment.
I know the market is still very bad. There's a lot of people without a job. So where should they start if they want to become a fractional product manager? Welcome back, folks. Another episode of The Product Founder. Today we have Mirela Mus. I'm really excited to talk to her. So first thing first, you are the founder of an exciting company called Product People. What is Product People and what inspired you to create it?
Happy to be here, Amir. Product People aims to be the premier destination for product management services in Europe. What does this mean in practice? In general, we would like to be there for our clients who are companies from Series B to publicly listed, some that you've purchased from or used their apps like Zalando and N26 and others. Along their journey, whenever one of their product managers or product ops becomes unavailable for an amount of times, usually it ranges from 2 months to 12 onwards. That could be a parental leave, a sick leave, a sabbatical, voluntary or involuntary attrition, or just a spike in headcount or workload needs. Another part is in a post-merger and acquisition setup when multiple companies are put together or come together, as there's pretty heavy lifting involved for an amount of time, or other type of transformation effects. Even if there's not a merger and acquisition involved, companies want to change and become better, switch towards product-led growth, or improve their user retention, or sometimes even do the boring platform migration. So we're there for them and work with other vendors while representing the client's interests. So this is something that I always wanted to do and was on the lookout for an idea. And this came to me while observing the market, that you had on one side the strategy consultancies with the pretty decks, and they're good at what they do of helping executives gain consensus and also taking the blame in case that turns out to be a bad idea. And then on the other hand, you have the just execute whatever you're told development agencies that at some point also started adding on some sort of product capability. Sometimes they call it product owner or business analyst and so on, but it's more low level and mainly interested to create or protect scope so that they create this revenue for the development team, which usually brings 80% of what these agencies make. So even if they come with best intentions, even if they have the let's say the best product folks out there, they will still be constrained about the setup of caring for their other colleagues, not losing their job. So we thought it's a good balance for us to be at the intersection of management consulting and just implementation shops while protecting the interest of our clients. And this also helped us a lot in hiring, because good PMs want to work on interesting challenges. They don't want to be told to just fill a backlog or just find work for developers so that these developers can bill more days or stay longer on a client engagement. And I think that was the core reason why we attract so many talented people, and as well as clients who want to do product management right and use it as a function that generates business value, not an IT cost center.
I see. And when did you start it though? What year was it?
Let's pause here for a second. The other day I was looking into our channel analytics and I noticed many of you guys are watching a lot of our episodes but not yet subscribed to our YouTube page or Spotify. I will ask you as a favor, please support us by subscribing to our YouTube page and Spotify page, and I will promise you I will do everything in my power to make each episode better and better. Thank you.
About 5 years ago, we started in 2020. Our first employee joined around May. At the end of the year, we were 5 people. At the end of the next year, we were 20. And after that, 40. And since then, we've been in between 40 and 50 people.
Awesome. And I remember that we had COVID in that period. So I'm just curious, what were the challenges starting a company like this?
Well, it was a blessing in disguise because I was always excited about remote work, and most of the consensus back then was that it's not feasible, especially with all the founder friends I had. Maybe because of the VC business model, especially from 0 to 1 phase, you want people to iterate faster or be in the same room, and that works better. But for our business model, a lot of the pressure comes from the outside, and our ICPs are all distributed companies. Even if they, let's say, have a core office in London, Amsterdam, Berlin, Barcelona, Lisbon, wherever, or 2 or 3 of these core offices, at one point in time or at every point in time, most of the communication needs to happen on Slack, email, or other digital format. And most of the people who would be working together won't all be in the same office. It's not physically possible. So this turned out to be a blessing in disguise because our ICPs are also distributed to a certain degree. So getting very good at aligning people async and figuring out the perfect meeting length for certain things and doing things without being in an office, gaining trust without being face-to-face, has been pivotal to our success. And it also helped us attract talent that was not in Berlin or some of the main cities. So some of our people live, let's say, an hour away from Hamburg and wouldn't necessarily appreciate a 2-hour commute each day to come into an office.
Yeah, I totally agree. So one thing which was very fascinating for me, I started entering the Web3 blockchain industry since 2020, and almost a lot of these crypto companies are fully remote based, and they're operating very well. So I started working for them, and I started notice that there are like 2 categories of people. One, they are very comfortable being in remote environment. Second one, they get demotivated and they get bored. So if you find the right people, which I think everyone in the Web3 are like very comfortable with that, you can work very well from home.
Yeah, so it takes a degree of maturity, and it's a certain personality type, and I think a certain level of seniority where you appreciate that. Because it takes someone who has been through the long commutes, who has been interrupted multiple times in the office while they were actually trying to do something and so on, to see the benefits. We did have attrition for people who after a year or 2 said, hey, I want to go back to the office because I kind of like that. Or we also have a co-working budget. So once in a while, if the neighbor takes too many house renovation projects, you can expense a co-working space, and we have people who do that. Or if they live with roommates, or there's always some personal circumstances that make working from home less of a sexy option than we think, and we accommodate that for our team by helping them reimburse some of these expenses when necessary.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing I noticed was when you move to working from home, or if you start working in a company that you work from home only, if you know people who are in the company, like you're close with them or you have worked previously in the past with them, then it's really easy to communicate with them via Slack or Google Meet. But if that connection or relationship was not established kind of in person or any way, then you might have more struggle. So if someone was already working in an office environment, so they already know all the colleagues, and then they move to remote, it's so much easier in my experience.
Yes and no. So you're right about having the connection, which makes everything easier. There's this book with You Move at the Speed of Trust, which is kind of summarizes the whole book, right? The less trust you have in a person or organization or a certain setup, the more cautious you're going to be and guardrails and protect yourself. If not, you're just like going to dash out at it. But being in person is not the only way to build connection. For example, at Product People, we have sometimes even the indication to write a how-to manual, so you could write a how-to Amir manual, like what you like, what you dislike. We share our favorite books and hobbies and a few things. We do have a few activities that get people connected. And despite in some cases during COVID, some people not even meeting in person once, they ended up doing Oktoberfest together or going to a holiday in Turkey and so on. So we did see stronger connections being built than in the office. And I've heard the opposite also from office, like people going to the office, the hope of making friends, and then seeing that it was quite siloed between departments and that they didn't really get what they were looking for. That being said, I think in general, as a human being, you should make friends outside of work. So it's inherited, it's unavoidable that you're going to build connection at work. And I think it's a positive second order effect, but that shouldn't be the reason you're doing that, right? You're going there, there's a commercial transaction. It will be a bit ungenuine and also not very practical to think that you're going to a company for making friends or dating or anything else. And the dating part will just be like an HR problem. So make friends outside of work primarily. And of course, you're going to build up these relationships when you work with people. And I've also made friends at our clients and everywhere else, because at some point you just connect with some people and you hear them saying what you were thinking and you see them doing what you were thinking of doing. And, you just have this pattern repeat over a year or so. And it's like, oh, I think I like this person. They seem to get me and they seem to be like me. So we can also exchange more on a personal level, but that shouldn't be the main purpose. And I feel that since work takes up so much of our time, people do have this bias of putting all their eggs in one basket, which then becomes even more traumatizing in case the company needs to do a downsizing or in case something goes sour at work. You're also going to lose a lot of these connections, and you don't know until you're taking out of that environment how many of these connections are genuine, or how many of them would make a specific effort to see you for a coffee when you're not working there anymore and when you're not like running into them evermore. So yeah, try having hobbies, try having friends outside of your specific work assignment, because that's healthier and a better way to have protection against any externalities in the long term.
Yeah, and what I also see is one of the things some product managers do wrong is when they join a company, right away they want to influence the product or something. Mm-hmm. But it's better rather than you actually like step back and just really try to understand the business and start to like establish relationships, not necessarily becoming friends with them, but even it could be like a small conversation. So like 2-3 months later, when you want to push a feature in a tight deadline, when you call them, hey, I'm Amir, I would like to, can you prove this? They're not like who you are. You should have done that like 3-4 months ago, right? So you as a product manager, when we are always talking with different stakeholders, it is very energy consuming, but you got to build relationships and you got to kind of maintain them at a certain level, not like you guys becoming buddies, but in a way that you can move things around.
I would also argue that it depends. So for example, in our line of work, we're expected to hit the ground running in 2 weeks. So sometimes we don't have this gracious period for relationship building. And also people don't care much about contractors, right? It's like, why is this contractor trying to socialize with me? You're here to do something and move on. So it's a double-edged sword. What we try to do is we try to identify which people are going to be relevant in our immediate timeline, like within the next month or so, set up these coffee chats and get to know you and so on. And then adapt to their preferences. We've worked with people who hate calls and who also hated updates. They were like, you don't need to manage up to me. Come to the reporting meetings that we have or come to this, but like you don't need to send stuff. And then we had others who were the most anxious people we've ever worked with, despite their very big, important title, and needed spoon feeding like children. Hey, here's a summary of what we did today. Here's the thing of this week. Here, by the way, this person may come and complain. By the way, we were in this call with customer success and they said this and that. So there was always, and by the way, I think this person is trying to come into your scope or your area. So there are different preferences that I would suggest people adapt to. And indeed, about changing things, it's more seeing how you could be helpful. So not necessarily don't change things or change things. Many PMs kind of get excited about, if I need to ship something or I need to put my fingerprint on this. But sometimes even cutting scope or removing features is beneficial for the company. And I like this quote from Julie Zhou, the one with Making of a Manager, and she writes quite a lot of good stuff. Her tip is focus foremost on what makes the company successful. And that also then goes beyond your department scope or your role scope or various turf wars. And of course, you need to get credit for that. So don't forget about having visibility or getting your manager to get credit for that, even better, while the manager knows that you did it. But don't get hung up of, okay, by this time I need to do X or or so on, because that won't be very productive.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. You talked about removing features. Do you have any stories on that?
Yeah, I do. And one of our clients, which is a publicly listed e-commerce company, which probably half of Europe has bought things from, I had a lot of fights internally about removing something relatively small. To understand the scope of this, it was a favorite icon on some cards that were shown as an upsell or / engagement thing in the B2C app, web, and so on across this experience. And the reason we wanted to remove it is that it wasn't working up to customers' expectations. There was another team building something similar, so that having that functionality would have given the end user a different result when clicking on the same thing, which is a super bad experience. And it was relatively costly to maintain because everything is if you're having millions of daily active users. My proposal was like, take it out. And then people were like, well, why take it out? I had to write a one-pager and explain, hey, it doesn't get enough traction. There's this other team building this other thing, which is going to be in a similar premise and it's going to confuse people. Building it right is going to take this amount of time, but then we don't have the evidence that it works, and so on and so forth. And we had a lot of discussion. It's like, yes, but is it maybe a chicken and egg problem? It doesn't work because it wasn't done properly, or doesn't it work because it doesn't work and people don't want it? At some point I had to go to like multiple teams and see, hey, are you using the data or the input you get from this? Because there was one concern that the applied science team was using that to give personalized recommendations. So we managed to remove it. And I remember there were multiple people coming in and say, hey, this is gone. Why is it gone? And so on. And just like sending the document with the reasoning. And it's like, oh, it was approved by such and such. So it's pretty tough. This bias of losing thing is very strong for people. And I have another one at another very large company that I would say most of Germany who has ever moved places have used. And there we were harmonizing a set of functionalities across multiple countries into one platform. And when you do that, you start to cut the extra scope and things that are not performing as well. And you want to take the things that are performing best everywhere and just double down on those and make them work very, very nicely. And this one wasn't also in line with the longer term strategy of making things easier for the end users while accepting that the quality of these end users may slightly decrease. It was a deal with it later problem. First, you optimize top of the funnel and then you optimize the quality later down the line, or figure out what signals were better than others, rather than just making the end user do a lot of upfront work. That wasn't very appreciated by the B2B side of the company. And one of the funniest arguments for that was that while that functionality that we killed was live, a competitor copied it. So then the clients were like, well, but this competitor has it. And we're like, yes, they copied it from us, but it's not really working. And we're taking it off. It's like not in line with what one, but they were like, but your competitor has it. We know they copied it from us. So it's also kind of a testament of how tech works, right? It's like most of this thing is like, oh, X is doing such and such. Let's do X, not the platform, but let's say company X or Y or Z is doing this. How about we do it? And you get all this pressure from investors and board members. And sometimes even the founders are like, why can't we do this? Our competitor is already on it. But you never know if the investment pays out, considering also that a dev team in Europe costs like $500,000 to $1 million all in, if you take overhead and everything. So if that takes half a year to develop, or even a quarter of a year, then that's a lot of money. And is it going to bring this return of investment in some way, shape, or form? People tend to get too excited about, oh yeah, we need to reach some feature parity, or we need to have this because the other side has it, but it's not necessarily the best way to think about it.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I agree with you on the feature removal. Also, somehow there's I would say, I don't know if this is something product managers are doing, or the managers above product managers are causing this issue. It's like, we got to do more. Like, more features is better,
More is more. It depends at what stage. There's something to be said, and there's a customer type. So if you're selling into enterprise is going to come with a checklist, because you move beyond any PLG tactics into white glove sales, wine and dine, take them to the process. And sometimes you just have these compliance checkboxes that you need to tick, or certain reporting requirements. So that I understand, it's just the grunt work that you need to do. When you move into regulated environments, it even gets harder and harder. But then this doesn't need to be applied to everything all the time. And there's also, like with all things in product, a bit of a negotiation. When is this needed by when? What's the impact? What's the opportunity cost if we do this versus something else?
I think what I see is the products that we use on a regular basis, if we really pay attention to them, they're doing one thing or few things in the best way possible that we cannot live without them.
Give me an example.
Riverside. We are using Riverside right now. So for streaming. Before I started the podcast back in August, I did a full research on all the softwares out there for recording. So there's some software which are great, but they're good for streaming. I didn't want it to do stream. I'm not a gamer or Twitch streamer or anything. I wanted to record a podcast in the proper way. It's easier for the guests, easier for me. Provides me some of the show notes, a little bit of high level overview and everything. This is Riverside, and then the next competitor is somewhere down here. I couldn't find someone.
What's the next competitor?
I forgot the name, but it's almost the same price as Riverside as well. And it's what's interesting. If I'm paying $50 per month for this one and $50 for that one for another company, I'm definitely not going to pay for that. In the beginning, I had some little bit difficulties with Riverside working with my camera, but then when it started to work, it was just smooth as hell. So I now, as a podcaster, cannot live without Riverside. It's a very essential part of my podcasting whole, I would say, experience, company, everything about it. So I feel like product managers are something missing this. The product I'm working on right now, what is it really going to do that people cannot live without? What are we so specialized in? I'm not saying go all the way, because sometimes you also don't really know what the end user wants. What do you really don't know what's going to stick for a while. But it's good to have that mindset.
Yeah, and this reminds me of a discussion in Billions. Have you watched the show?
No.
It gives you the insight on how investors work to some degree. And one of the interesting questions is Bobby Axelrod, the main character, poses to someone who was upset of not getting investors excited is, what is it that you do and you are the best in the world at? Then he starts with a rant. You're selling a product you didn't invent, a delivery method you didn't invent. Nothing of what you do is patentable or a unique user experience. You have not really honed your effort. So it's not a one-to-one code, but something like that. And it makes so much sense in the examples you just gave. You need to really solve for one use case very well, and then potentially you can expand into adjacencies.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing, I kind of see it in a way, some similarities between podcasting and product management. But one thing I heard from a lot of podcasters was find your first 100 listeners. It sounds like an easy number, but it's actually a very difficult number to hit. That on a recurring base, these 100 people are going to come and spend an hour or 30 minutes with you, listening to what you're saying in a week. So it's very interesting stuff. I want to ask you that what I see is one of the biggest difficulties in this industry is deciding when to bring fractional help. So when do you think is the right time to bring the fractional product managers?
One of the things we're seeing when people bring us in is they're at the end of their wits. So it's not like when the first PM quits from the team, is when the second one quits within 2 weeks or gets sick or starts underperforming. And then as a product leader, so like a manager of ICs or as a founder who would be managing a product team, they're like, okay, I cannot do this anymore. I could have covered for one person at a 50-30% and kind of keep the ball rolling, but I can't cover for two people. I need to look outside and this is worth the cost. So that's in the companies who don't have experience with this, who are a bit more cost sensitive. I also understand their concerns because there are lots of mediocre agencies out there as the barrier to entry is very low. That was also one of our strategic moves of focusing on quality, but people can experience that quality only after working with us. And to work with us is a pretty long path for them and as well as a risk. And it's good because once they become customers, we have a very good return rate and then they recommend us to other customers, but it's a very slow acquisition path. The other part is companies who are very experienced with working with contractors, usually larger ones from Series C onwards. They had figured out, like in your example with Riverside or Do One Thing Good, they know that if they want to financial support or advisory, that they should look at the KPMG and PwC. If they want strategy, they are the top tier 3 McKinsey, BCG, Bain. If they want implementation, it depends. Some dev shops are very good at Scala, some are very good at Python or other backend, others are good at mobile apps or a certain type of experience. And then they don't steer away from the core competency of these agencies. Even, of course, these agencies will always try to upsell or cross-sell a bit more. And that's where we get very well plugged in, because they see us as, okay, this is the agency that does product management well. I'm going to combine them with this dev shop that is good at this specific thing, or that specific consultancy is going to give an overall recommendation of how to, for example, improve your compliance across a certain customer segment. And we're going to go and look into the overall customer journey. Where does this actually fit in? Because the consultancy is just going to provide a few slides and a few translated from legalese into human language, but not a lot of that. And they wouldn't know how to execute it tactically, and they don't understand how all the systems work together and how does that reflect on the customer experience.
For the product managers who are listening, do you think moving toward fractional product management is a good idea? Because I see that I have seen many people who are fractional marketers or things like that. But I'm just curious in your experience as a PM.
Maybe one clarification for the people listening here. We are not a marketplace, so we employ the people that serve our clients. So even if you would be at a client fractionally, you would be a full-time employee at Product People and not having only these responsibilities, but also internal assignments, which are also judged for at the performance review and promotion path and so on. So similarly, we are like the management consultancies where you can have a very good career and track record with us. And at some point you can decide to move into industry, or you can decide to continue your career here if you get disappointed of what you see behind the curtains of all these big, shiny, impressive companies that we work with. So the other option is for people to just be independent on their own. I've seen
that's
that
what I meant.
The independent side has worked better for people who have had previous leadership roles. And this is the path that I would recommend, because leadership roles are sparse. They don't come out very often for the obvious reasons, because you may have a director of product to 6 headcount, or a head of product to 6 PMs. And with downturn, leadership roles have become even more rare, because now it's expected that you have maybe 1 to 8, or you have more senior PMs. So then the senior PMs have even less hand-holding requirements. So then you need fewer, overhead position. Although a director or head of product should also provide strategic guidance and a lot of other things. But that has been the trend currently, the flattening of organizations and having fewer people managers or even fewer executives. So for that, you can try fractional. It's also a good way to date certain companies without making a full-time commitment that will then potentially impact your resume if things don't work out in the 6 months or so. It's not as useful as an individual contributor, because there's no career path. You just get pigeonholed there, and at some point you age out or lose the skills that make you relevant on the market. And you're also not going to see it very often, because there are always companies that are lagging behind. As you see right now, there are still people doing Scrum Master and Agile Coach roles, whereas the more forward-thinking companies have eliminated these positions long ago. So it's usually a good position if you're transitioning, if you're going through a transformation, and you want to put the whole product and tech department on a cadence and get people to work together and get them to implement some rituals. But at some point you need fewer and fewer and fewer and fewer of these roles, and they become more overhead. And some of this pressure to coordinate and keep people on the cadence goes on to the engineering manager. And also engineering has started receiving the same pressure as product and design and all the others of doing more and taking more ownership in the last 2 years. Does this make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So for a PM listening now, and I know the market is still very bad, and still there's a lot of people without a job. So where should they start if they want to become a fractional product manager?
I mean, they could apply to us. So last year we had 2,600 and something applicants, and we've hired 14 people. So our conversion funnel is pretty tight. But of course, there are others where you could have this type of impact. So if you can also look at companies who have been growing a lot, and there aren't that many as they used to be, but those could be a good play if you're looking at a Series B who's growing very fast, or a Series C, as then your job will also continue to grow and you can just be taken up on the positive trend of that company. And another part is look at companies who have a very solid career path for PMs, and even an associate or junior or apprentice program, because there your career will be somewhat taken care of as long as you're also in control and do the right things. Whereas for companies who don't and treat this PM role more like a secretary on a cost center, they're not going to care about you. So that would be one indication. Does this company show that they have a pretty good ladder for the product roles? If you browse LinkedIn, do you see juniors? Do you see mid-level? Do you see senior PMs, head of, director, and so on? So that do they have a big enough product organization that you can learn from peers and also move up the ranks? Do they actually have a product where this department can make a pretty big impact? Because sometimes product is not the most impactful function, and that's also fine to accept it. Sometimes just in B2B, sales is the most important department, and it is what it is, because there are like some industries like maritime or logistics and so on, where you're not going to get them through product-led growth or any of the cool tactics. It's still of who you know and building these relationships that get you in the door, but you could still solve very interesting problems that have a real impact on people's life. Similar in the medical sector, especially if you're dealing with healthcare providers. And most importantly, also try to understand like what you want and what fits with your personality and what kind of company you're getting yourself into, because the culture of that company and the way they do things is going to impact you the most, as everything that falls to the crack somehow lands in product. Most of the dysfunctions of a company end up on product management's plate. So if you're, for example, going in a company that has a tendency to hire cutthroat people who are not very nice to each other, you're going to be on the receiving end of it. I remember I was getting feedback from one of our client-facing people and was asking about a specific client that they onboarded in, and they were surprised how jolly and friendly everyone was at a client. It was like, I don't know how they recruit, but basically everyone we speak to, even in escalation calls and so on, are so composed and friendly and trying to make it work. Whereas you have others and you think you go into a very banal call and then you get thrown under the bus and you like never know what to expect in a catch-up call. So it's a lot of this that also impacts your work. So don't just listen to the nice frameworks. I know you had a question about frameworks. Don't listen to their frameworks or other things. Just try to understand how they do things. What's the personality of the people in charge? Because that's also in smaller companies is going to reflect on the rest of the organization. And is this something that you would like? For example, I don't mind people being very direct and sometimes not sounding extremely nice as long as they're not outright offensive. But I do mind when people back channel, or I feel that I need to always beat around the bush for things, and when things move slow, that frustrates me more than someone saying your idea sucks and we shouldn't do it, and these are the reasons why it's not good, and let's do something else, because at least I've gotten some feedback. I can counter it, I can move on, I can see if I agree or not, or so on. Whereas if I need to talk with someone's boss's boss and have all these proxy battles and discussion, I feel for my personality type is very energy draining. I can do it in the right context, right? And anyone can do anything if you motivate yourself and put a lot of energy into it, but the energy expenditure is way higher than just straight out talking with people.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that you've been working with so many companies in Europe, and also you work with so many product managers within Europe. What is a couple of patterns you see? Patterns maybe what holds them back or leads them to failure?
I'm going to lean into something I read into an article, and it synthesized what I was thinking, but somehow, you see it articulated by someone else, and it's like, this is so much better. I think as with humans, companies' strengths are also their biggest weaknesses. So, you cannot have one without the other. And that's mostly, I think it's a plus where that connects very well with the industry that you're in. So let's say you're in cybersecurity. It's fine if you have people that are quite cagey and do the security to obscurity and then don't share a lot and always think of the worst first before the best, because that's their line of work and that needs to reflect throughout the company and throughout the product. You can't really get hacked. You can't really have leaks and so on, because that would destroy the company. But if you're having like a food delivery company, the risk of fraud is way smaller because the basket sizes are way smaller. There you would actually want to emphasize on speed. So you want to make mistakes faster, but also you want to recover from them faster because people are hungry. You need to send their pizza and pad thai over or whatever they've done. So that's why I would say it's a problem where like the business model and the end customer expectations don't fit with what the company does or the pattern of the founders compared to having a mistake. And I think this is also why you don't get these business books that agree with each other, because you have companies that do the exact opposite. If you think of Google with their like very friendly policy and do what you want, and then you have the very restrictive other companies, and they're both successful while doing the opposite things. I believe that also stems from their business model and also just being very consistent. Maybe like one big mistake is being inconsistent and changing all the time. We're this and we're that and we're not this and we're not that. Then the other part would be like lying to yourself as a company about what you are. And most of them kind of try to copy a nice job ad, and then the people apply. And it's also like the fault of the applicants, because the applicants want to see a Marty Kagan style job ad, and then the companies oblige and write that, and it's like, oh, you're going to do all these great things and you're going to be so empowered, and then they're in there like getting their roadmap for the next 12 months is like unmovable because we have this enterprise customer get shopping, and then they're very disappointed. And of course, even within that construct, they could still have a lot of impact. There could still be a lot of room for creativity and interpreting certain requirements in a way that is better or more interesting. They could go around and do a lot of user research and discovery during that time, maybe even have like side quests where they implement during certain quiet times something that they feel passionately that and have evidence that it will work. But still, it sounds a bit disempowering at first.
Absolutely. We are slowly getting close to the end of the podcast show. Is there something you would like to share with the listeners, something to check out, a newsletter, something like that?
I've been lately reading a lot from Scott Galloway's newsletter, and before that I was also reading Matt Levine's. I think it's important to get out of the product bubble. Maybe because I've been in it for so long, I feel that everything repeats and there's a lot of consensus. And that's where my brain usually turns off. Because if everything kind of sounds the same, then my pattern recognition kicks in and then I don't notice anything anymore. And the other part, I've been also reading more about social trends, because that impacts everything from voting to consumer purchases to how certain investments are made. So maybe read a bit more about the loneliness epidemic, what are the demographic trends across Europe, US, Asia, this sort of thing, to get a better sense of the world. And then that puts a lot of things that are happening right now also in context and makes it sound less crazy or less random, at least to me.
Absolutely. Well, folks, make sure to check out Mirela's LinkedIn as well. She posts very good content. I always read all of them. Thank you so much for joining this podcast episode.
It was a pleasure, Amir.
Wow, you made it till the end. I'm very proud of you. Comment down below which part of the podcast did you like the most and who should I interview next. Also, on the screen, you will see a lot of our other great episodes that you should definitely check out.